All right, guys, welcome back. We are continuing with trig this week. This is what we'll probably focus on for the next lesson, and then we'll do some application work next week. All right, so today our essential question is, how can you use trig to solve for a missing side in a right triangle? So this is a little bit different than what we have done with Pythagorean theorem. When we did Pythagorean theorem, we were given two sides and we had to find the third missing side. Instead, with trig problems, you will be given one side and one angle, and you'll have to use the trig ratios to solve for a certain side. Okay? All right, so just a reminder, when we say trig ratios, we are talking about SOHCAHTOA. So let's just review what each of those letters represents really quickly, and that will be a good transition into how we use these to solve. Okay? So remember, the S stands for sine of a given angle, theta, is equal to the ratio of the opposite over the hypotenuse side. Okay? The C stands for cosine. Cosine of my angle theta is equal to the ratio for the adjacent and the hypotenuse side. Okay? Then the last one, tangent of the angle, is equal to the ratio between the opposite and the adjacent sides. Okay? So when I mentioned earlier that we would be given an angle, theta will represent that angle that we're given. Okay? If you still need some help with what each of the letters represent and where those are located, you really need to go back and watch the first trig video that I posted last week in week 1. Okay? All right, so we're going to jump right in and do an example. Okay, so in this problem, it says find the length of side UV. So that is this side here. Round to the nearest tenth. So guys, on IXL, for all your answers, when you find the decimal, you will be rounding to the nearest tenth, which just means 1 decimal place. Okay? All right, so we are going to start this problem the same way that we have been doing when we label the different parts. So just remember, label first. Okay? And when I say label, I mean mark the reference angle, opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse. Okay? So in this triangle, we are given angle V is 42 degrees. We don't know angle T. The hypotenuse is 6. And then we are trying to find this yellow side, which I can see is adjacent to my angle. So this is my A. And since we're trying to find that side, we are going to call this X. Okay? And then obviously this side UT is opposite. We aren't going to be using that because we don't have a measurement, and that's not what I'm trying to find. Okay? So I can see that the letters that I'm focusing on are adjacent and hypotenuse. Excuse me. I'm a little bit winded from chasing a 2-year-old around. So if I sound out of breath, that's why. Okay, so looking back up here at what we wrote down, which of the 3 ratios uses the adjacent and the hypotenuse sides? Okay, well, I can see that would be cosine. So that's going to give me a hint about how I'm going to find the missing side length. Okay, so what I'm going to do next, I'm going to write down all the things that I've been given in the triangle, starting with theta, my angle. So since we are using angle V that was given as 42 degrees, that's theta. Okay? My hypotenuse side is 6. My adjacent side is what I'm trying to find, that's X. And then my opposite side, we don't know what that is and we're not trying to find that. Okay? So like I mentioned here, we are not going to use the O. Okay? So the way that I'm going to solve for this side is I'm going to use this equation right here. Okay? So I've got cosine of theta equals A over H. All right, and then I'm going to plug in what I just wrote down over here for my opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse, and theta, not using O. All right, so cosine of 42 degrees is equal to x over the hypotenuse, which is 6. Okay, so for each of these questions where you're solving, you're going to set up one of the three trig ratios equations, sine, cosine, or tangent, just depending on what you've been given in your triangle. Okay? All right, so the question is now, how can I get this thing by itself? Okay? So this is a little bit different than a normal equation. The same thing goes for using inverse operations to get x by itself. So the funny thing is this cosine of 42. Okay? So when you see that, think of that as being its own number. The cosine and the 42 are stuck together, and they represent one number. We can't separate the 42 from the cosine. Okay? So I can see on this side, since I want to get x by itself, and I have division by 6, the opposite operation would be to multiply both sides by 6. So on both sides, I'm going to do multiplication by 6, which I can see right here, that's going to cancel out, and I'm left with what I want. X equals 6 multiplied by the cosine of 42 degrees. Okay, so we are almost done. This last step, however, you have to use a calculator because we can't do this in our head. Okay, that ratio for that angle can be found using your graphing calculator, which I'm going to show you how to do on Google. So, sorry if this is a little shaky. So go to calculator on Google. There is a little option up here to do radian or degree, and I'm going to select degree, okay, because we're using degrees and not radians. That's a different way to measure angles. And so what I'm going to type in is 6, and if you look right here, you can see the trig ratios, cosine of 42 degrees. Okay, so that's giving me 4.45886. Okay. So now I'm going to come back over here and write that down. X equals 4.45. Oops. Okay, so remember it said to the nearest tenth, so we are going to take this 4 behind the decimal and round it up to a 5 since there is a number 5 or greater behind it. So my final answer for the length of that missing side, x, is 4.5. Okay? So, for each of these questions, start by labeling, figure out what letters you're going to use, and then that will tell you which trig ratio equation you'll have to set up. Okay? All right, so, and it's always a good idea if you feel like you understand what's going on, pause it, work it through, then play the video, watch my solution, and see if you had done it correctly. Okay? All right, so let's start. We're going to label our angle, 64. So I know theta is 64 degrees. My hypotenuse is 10. We are finding side VX, which is this side here. I'm going to put my variable to represent what's missing there. And since that is directly across from theta, that is my opposite side, I'm going to highlight the labeling so we can see the difference. Okay? All right, and then my adjacent side is down here on the bottom. We don't know what that is, so we're not going to use it. And it's not what we're asked to find. Okay? So my opposite side is x, what I don't know and I'm trying to find. The hypotenuse is 10. And then my adjacent side we don't know, so we are not using that. Okay? All right, so question is, what trig ratio uses O and H? SOHCAHTOA, so I'm going to use sine. So setting up that equation, sine of theta equals O over H, and then I'm going to plug in what I know. So I'm going to plug in sine of 64 degrees equals x over 10. And then in the same way on the last question, we use an inverse operation to get x by itself. Since we have divided by 10 here, we're going to do the same thing and multiply by 10 on both sides. Okay, this is going to cancel out. And I'm left with x is equal to 10 multiplied by the sine of 64 degrees. Okay, I'm going to go over to my calculator, make sure it's in degree mode, and type in 10 sine of 64. And I get 8.987. Okay, so rounding up to the nearest tenth, meaning one decimal, this is going to be 8.9. We really, since this is going to round up to a 9, we could just go ahead and say this is 9. Okay, I think IXL would take both of those answers. Okay? All right, let's move. We're going to do one more example, and then I'll give you some instructions on IXL, and you guys can start practicing. All right, so on this last example, I'm going to label my angle is 37. My hypotenuse is CE. I'm trying to find CD, so I'm going to put an X here. And then this side across my opposite side is 10. Ooh, that was kind of a weird O. So since I'm trying to find X, which is my adjacent side, and I'm given my opposite side, that means that I'll be using the trig ratio. And again, if you're confused about why we're not using the hypotenuse, we don't know the length and we're not asked to find that side. Okay? All right, so we have theta is 37 degrees. My adjacent side is x, what I don't know and I want to find. My opposite side is 10. My hypotenuse, we don't know, therefore we will not use that. Okay? So think about SOHCAHTOA, which ratio is going to use O and A? I know that's tangent. So tangent of theta equals opposite over adjacent. All right, so plugging in what we know, the tangent of 37 degrees equals 10 divided by x. So this one's a little different from the last two. My variable is now in the bottom, and I'm going to show you kind of a one-step way to solve for x here. That's a little bit easier. Okay? So if you remember, think back to maybe 8th grade math. Grab a sheet of paper here. Let's say we have 10. We know that can be written as 50 over 5. That's a true statement. 50 divided by 5 is 10. Well, on the other hand, I could write 5 is the same thing as 50 divided by 10. So if you look, you can see that right here, those numbers were just flipped. Okay? So when I have that division equals a number, I can switch the denominator with the other side of the equation, and the equation is still true. So here, by that same logic, I'm going to take tan of 37 and flip it with x. Okay? So now on this side of the equation, I'll have x equals 10 divided by the tangent of 37 degrees. Okay? So again, what I did is I took these two things and I flipped them. Maybe write yourself a note here just so you remember. Flip, and that's when what you were solving for, the variable is in the bottom. Okay? So this time, in my calculator, I'm going to type in 10 divided by the tangent of 37, because remember, a fraction is just a different way to write a division problem. Okay? So I'm in degree mode. I'm typing in 10 divided by tan of 37, and I get 13.27. Okay, so rounded to the nearest tenth, that will become 13.3. Okay? I don't know if you guys can hear, but my toddler is providing wonderful background music for this video, and I apologize if that's distracting. But what I want to challenge you guys to do, try this one on your own, and I will post the solution in a day, and you can check and see if you did it correctly. Make sure your notes are complete, answer the essential question, and then start your work on IXL.